All right, folks, we're going to go ahead and get started. So thank you so much for giving us some time on this August Saturday. Really appreciate it. My name is State Senator Ethan Corson. I have the privilege of representing Senate District 7, which is a big rectangle of Northeast Johnson County. So we start on 47th Street on the Wyandotte Johnson line, and then we go out south to about 95th Street with a little bit of a jagged edge. And then we go from State Line to about 6 blocks west of Metcalf. So that's all are part of kind of the 10 cities in Northeast Johnson County. The only ones we don't have all of, we have part of Leawood and we have part of Overland Park. So this is our 56th consecutive monthly town hall, which I'm really proud of. So when I got up this morning, I was, having not like really kind of thought issue by issue. I originally thought, oh, it's August. Maybe it's going to be a little bit slow. Maybe I'm not going to have as big of an update. But when I started really preparing, I thought there actually is a fair amount of stuff that I need to update folks on. So it has not been a completely quiet August. So there is a fair amount of stuff that I want to update you on. Number one is that the school finance task force met for, I believe, Senator Petty, 2 days. School finance task force met for a day and a half this past week. My colleague and friend, Senator Pat Petty, who represents part of Johnson County, but a lot of Wyandotte County, is on that task force, and she's agreed to give us a short update of kind of what happened with the education task force. But I'll give you sort of the context, and this is something that I'm really trying to emphasize with folks as we head into the 2026 election cycle. And that is that the current school finance formula, which is the formula that has really served us well for the past several years, this is the formula that the Kansas Supreme Court said met the requirements of being adequate and equitable. It helped us end what was, I think, over a decade, actually, of litigation involving school finance. That formula expires and needs to be either reauthorized, renewed, or a new formula needs to be passed in 2027. So this is going to be one of the first things that the next governor and that the next legislature are going to be dealing with. So that is the context for why this task force exists. So this is critically important because there are some folks who look at this as a real opportunity to rework the formula in a way that would dramatically decrease funding for our public schools. So we really need to make sure as we head into next year's elections that we're thinking about electing folks who will support having a robust and strong school funding formula that will keep us out of court, that will continue to fund our schools, that will make sure that we are meeting the constitutional requirement of having adequate and equitable school funding. So Senator Petty is going to give you an update on that. Representative Xu and I are part of the Joint Committee on Fiduciary Financial Institutions Oversight. That's kind of a mouthful. But we did meet we had a one-day hearing earlier. I think it was at the end of June or early August? July. Okay. Neither of those. So I chose A or B and it was actually C. Okay. So July. We've had a lot going on. Okay. So yeah. Yeah, so we met in July for a half day, and Representative Xu is going to kind of update you on that. Representative Stogsdill and I in September are going to be on the Special Committee on Taxation. So this is a joint House and Senate committee that's meeting for 2 days in September, and we're going to be focused on tax issues. I've been a little bit of a broken record on this, but my hope is that we're able to really focus on property taxes. That is far and away the number one issue that I hear about, both when I was campaigning in 2024 in our district and as I've been more recently getting around the state more, I still hear that all the time, no matter where I am in the state, is property taxes. So I really hope that we'll take a look at that. As you know, my frustration on the tax side has been that we've done too much on the income tax side and not enough on the property tax side. And so I think I would have inverted those. I think we need to be more weighted on property taxes than income tax reductions. And so that's been a frustration that I've had. I've introduced several bills that would reduce property taxes. So I'm going to be bringing those up. So I think that that's something that we'll see how that committee goes, but I do hope that there is a real focus on property taxes, because that was it was disappointing, because that was kind of the crux of the campaign in 2024, was everybody was saying that, hey, if you vote for me, if you elect me, we're going to tackle property taxes. And then we got to the legislative session and we started doing all this stuff on income taxes. So I really hope that we focus on the property tax piece. I think we particularly need to look at it as it relates to fixed income seniors, and trying to make sure we are doing everything we can for fixed income seniors to be able to age in place, stay in their home if that's what they want to do. So I think we need to do property taxes generally, but specifically we need to focus on making sure that we're protecting our seniors. The governor appointed a new Supreme Court justice. So a woman named Larkin Walsh, who is a Leawood resident, is going to be on the Kansas Supreme Court. She is replacing Justice Evelyn Wilson, who really sadly is retiring because she has been diagnosed with ALS. And I didn't have the privilege of knowing Justice Wilson well, but everybody who does just really shares that she's a really remarkable woman, and that's just such a cruel disease. So it was sad to see her obviously have to leave the court because of that. But I think Ms. Walsh will be a really strong justice, has a really great experience. And I bring that up in part just to let you know that we do have somebody new on the state Supreme Court, but because depending on the outcome of the amendment in August of 2026, this could be the last time that we appoint a justice through our current merit selection process and not through direct elections. So that's something that I've opposed that amendment. I was vociferous in my opposition to that amendment. I really think that we want our justices appointed based on merit, based on qualification, based on legal acumen, legal analytical skills, writing ability, research ability. We do not want $100 million in out-of-state spending like we saw in Wisconsin coming into our state to try to buy seats on the Supreme Court for particular interests. We really do not want that. So I am urging everybody to oppose that amendment in August 2026. So hopefully that Ms. Walsh will not be the last justice who's appointed through our merit selection system. A really exciting development is that we have started the early process of standing up the Office of Early Childhood. And this is something that the legislature passed last year, was something that was a big priority of Governor Kelly, because we had a task force that looked at this issue of what we were doing around early childhood, and it found that there were 50 programs in state government that dealt with early childhood issues, and they were spread all across our state government. So some of them were located in Kansas Department of Health and Environment. Some of them were located with the Kansas State Board of Education. Some of them were located elsewhere. So it was this real kind of confusing web. And if you were a childcare provider, if you were in any way dealing with the childcare system, it was just really cumbersome to know where you were supposed to go. And a lot of people said, it's like I went here, then they told me I was in the wrong place, and I went there, and then they told me I was still in the wrong place. And so what the Office of Early Childhood is meant to do is it's meant to be a cabinet level position. So the person running it will be appointed by the governor and then confirmed by the Senate. So it'll be a cabinet level position. And it's meant to centralize not all, there's some good reasons that not all of it will be centralized, but 20 of those 50 pieces will be brought under this Office of Early Childhood. So it will be more centralized, more streamlined, and make it easier for folks who are working in that system to get their questions answered, get things more quickly and readily addressed. So it should be a real win for the state of Kansas. That will officially open sometime in the middle of 2026. But they did this week announce the transition team that is going to be working on getting all of those different 20 operations moved over into the Office of Early Childhood. So I think that's a really exciting development. And then I don't really mean to break news with this last point, but as I know that probably most of you are aware, there's this conversation, that's kind of an artful way of saying it, going on nationally about redrawing congressional districts sort of mid-cycle. And so we've kind of heard it, it originally kind of started with Texas and then California. And so to give people a sense of kind of how this would usually work, is that the census would take place every 10 years on 2030, 2040, 2050. And so the census would happen, the results would get compiled, and then in the next even year, so 2022, 2032, those districts would get redrawn, both the legislative districts and the congressional districts and the state board. In Kansas, the State Board of Education districts would get redrawn in conformity with those new census results. The idea being we want to have districts that all have roughly equal population. And so we followed that process in Kansas. We had the 2020 census. And then in 2022, we had the redistricting took place in Kansas. We had a redistricting committee. Representative Sawyer Clayton and I had the privilege of being on that committee. So it's sort of like been there, done that. We got the T-shirt, the whole thing. And then those maps would be good until 2032. And so I did hear yesterday that there is some interest from President Masterson in doing sort of a mid-census redistricting. Again, I don't know if that will happen. I don't want folks to run out of here saying that we are definitely going to do that. But the dynamic is that President Masterson is running for governor and Jeff Collier is also running for governor. And they are both trying really, really hard to get the Trump endorsement. And so President Masterson views this as like, if I do this, this will like really get me some gold stars with President Trump, and maybe I could get his endorsement in the governor's race. So I think President Masterson has some interest in it. I don't know if any of my House colleagues have heard kind of what the attitude is on the House chamber, but I did hear that yesterday. I wanted to share that with you. And then I'll just share that my view is, I'm really opposed to this. I'm really opposed to this because the goal of redistricting should be to try to draw fair maps where every Kansan has the ability to make their voice heard, whomever they want to vote for, however the results of the election shake out. But we should just have fair maps where every Kansan has an equal voice in the process. And so this idea that we're going to break from decades and decades of precedent and say, well, we're just going to start doing this whenever we think that we can gain a political advantage, I just think that's a really dangerous thing for us to start doing. I mean, Coach McDonald's my high school baseball coach, right? So, I mean, it is really changing the rules in the middle of the game, right? I mean, we set these maps. We fought like cats and dogs over these maps. We went to the Kansas State Supreme Court over these maps. But at the end of the day, they were approved, and those should be the maps until 2032. We really should not be in the business of saying midway through the game, we're going to change the rules of the game. So just to share that with you, I'll probably have a better sense in the coming months of the likelihood of that happening. But I did hear that yesterday and felt like it was worth sharing. But again, I don't want to don't want to break news and tell you that that's definitely something that's happening. So that's all I've got. And Representative Sawyer Clayton.
Thank you, Senator Corson. I'm Representative Stehpanie Sawyer Clayton. I represent the 19th House District, which means nothing to any of you because you're normal people with lives. I represent the area from Metcalf to State Line, 83rd to 103rd, unless you're east of Mission, and then Somerset is the northern boundary, with 95th being the southern boundary. You can refer to yonder map that we fought over quite a bit in the redistricting committee. So I will go ahead and offer a House perspective to the information that Senator Corson dropped. I didn't pay much attention when Texas was doing their thing because, that's Texas, but we have heard in the news that President Trump has asked Missouri to draw their congressional districts, specifically to get Congressman Cleaver gerrymandered out of Kansas City. And so while I try not to concern myself with things that happen in that lesser state, it is kind of close to us population-wise. And so I have a good working relationship with our Speaker of the House, and anytime I hear any sort of news about potential redistricting in Kansas, I say, hey, Hawkins, are we going to do this? And the general impression that I have is that while the Senate president, who is running for governor, is interested in doing this and probably would like to curry favor with the president, they are, after all, despite the fact that we may or may not agree with what they do or do not do, these are human beings that want to get an endorsement, right? And so if we look at that and follow it to its logical conclusion, it would come as no surprise if our Senate president would be pushing for something that might please the US president. So we just kind of look at that and say, okay, we accept it. I've had a lot of therapy, I'm sorry. But in any case, so then we look at the House, and the House Speaker is running for statewide office, but he's running for insurance commissioner, and his desire is to keep things a little bit more even-keeled. He is likely to definitely get the nomination. He's not facing a primary, so he is going to come about this with a little bit more of a chill attitude. He does not need to procure any big-ticket endorsements, and so it is less likely that we will see that sort of action from the House. Now, while it is the principle of the thing for me to say we should not be pursuing redistricting, we should in fact have an independent redistricting commission. Legislators should not have our dirty little biased hands on those maps, because even I felt morally icky about being on the redistricting committee because I know what I want my district to look like, right? And so that bias is there, right? But I suppose that if we are indeed looking at a national climate in which we politicize redistricting, I believe the applicable phrase here would be fool around and find out. Or at least that's the Saturday morning version of it. I think you guys are picking up what I'm putting down. And one of the things is that we have 4 congressional districts in our state. Now, redistricting is kind of like making a souffle, and I'm awful at baking, so trust me, I know all the ways in which things can go wrong. If you get the slightest little mistake, then if they move things too much one way to, for instance, turn Congressional District 3, which has our current Congresswoman Sharice Davids, into more of a redder district, they do it at their own peril, because then they are potentially endangering the makeup of Congressional District number 2, which houses Derek Schmidt. So that has a lot of working class areas that can kind of swing either way. And so that sort of thing, when you have those perilous balances, when you have some of the weirdest congressional maps that I have ever seen, you can ask Senator Corson when they actually passed our first that map that we have out now. I looked at it and started laughing, and I'm like, you guys, give us the real map, come on, because it was that outlandish. But it is very tenuous, and so it is a dangerous thing to mess with. So while I prefer to conduct myself above board and unbiased and as professional as possible, if I encounter unprofessional and partisan behavior from the other side, then it is incumbent upon me to counter that with even more unprofessional behavior. And so I would prefer not to. I think that we should lend dignity to this situation, but I also think that you all send us there to be dignified and appropriate, but to take off the gloves when it becomes necessary. It's up to us to practice the proper self-control and to ascertain when the time is to remove the gloves and when it is to keep them on. So I always try to be a lady up there. Now, I am the ranking minority member on the Commerce, Labor, and Economic Development Committee. We will be having a 5-day interim committee meeting or a study committee meeting. We do not know exactly when those meetings will occur, but apparently some of the subject matter we will be looking at that is apparently pertinent to commerce as opposed to finance is Bitcoin. So, so for all those Bitcoin bros out there, we'll be taking a look at that. I think I know who requested that one. So we'll spend some time looking at that. We will also spend some time looking at licensure. Now, this is one of my concerns because on the one hand, I do want to make it easier for people to go into business and to prosper. In particular, people who might live in a single income household. A lot of people might not have the time or the means to study for or pay for those certifications. But part of my job as a legislator is to, again, maintain the tenuous balance between growing business, which is allowing people to get these licenses, to start their own businesses, to move forward in things, but also consumer protection. Because if we are not protecting consumers, then that is actually at the peril of the business community, because then we stop trusting our business owners. We stop trusting our professionals, because who's going to trust a professional that every time you go to them, you end up with a weird rash in the hospital, right? You want to make sure that everything is, again, professional and above board. So that is one of the things that I will be looking at and pushing for when we move into this interim study committee in the fall. Between that and just taking your input on taxes, like Senator Corson, I am passionately for lowering property taxes. Again, with the tenuous balance, we're always careful when we talk about that because we have a lot of local government officials up here that are like, oh, you just wait a minute. And so same thing with sales taxes. I do think that our sales tax rate, our overall sales tax rate in Kansas is way too high. When I first took office in 2013, the first thing that they tried to get us to do was to raise the sales tax to support income tax cuts. So we always think about our tax system as a three-legged stool with sales tax, income tax, and property tax. We are seeing, again, it's like people have no memory with the way that our tax plans have been put in place. We're seeing a major ratcheting down of the income tax. And what that means is that those costs will be passed down to you as the consumers. Since we do live in a capitalistic society, I think it makes very little sense for us to penalize you all for making purchases. But, who am I to say? I'm just a girl. So, but in any case, I do thank you all for having me today. I have another event that I need to go to. And by event, I mean the Round Hill Bags tournament. But I have constituents that are relying on me to make sure that I win this. So I will not be here for the questions portion of the day, but you can please feel free to, my email is everywhere. If you just Google me, it's there. Please feel free to reach out with any questions, and I'd be happy to sit down and visit with you all and have coffee. I have a little bit more time on my hands now that school has started way too early. It's like 100 outside. But anyway, thank you all for having me, and I don't know who wants to go next. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Clayton. I was kind of voluntold it was my turn, so here I am. Good morning, I'm Melanie Haas. I represent District 2 on the State Board of Education. That would be the northeast corner of Johnson County and the southern half of Wyandotte County. So I'm going to start with a question that I had when I walked in the door. It was, what's going on at the federal level with, the letter that I got in my inbox this week that came from the Federal Department of Education was now they've opened an investigation in Kansas. And apparently there's a district called Shawnee. I think they meant Shawnee Mission, but that's what the letter says, that Shawnee is being investigated along with KCK and 2 other districts. And I'm going to pull it up here so that I can actually read from it, because I really like the line about intimate facilities. They are concerned, of course, about transgender children. So let me get this for you. Got to go to the right app. Email. There we go. U.S. Department of Education launches investigation into 4 districts for alleged Title IX and FERPA violations. FERPA is the law that requires that districts provide an entire educational record when a family asks for it of their student. And so they're kind of insinuating that children are undergoing gender transitions and the schools aren't telling them about it. And I thought, man, are we doing surgery in schools? What's going on? We know this is not happening. This is the dumbest thing I've ever seen. This is ridiculous. This is a massive distraction. It's going to consume a ton of resources and for no good reason at all. I've been in Shawnee Mission schools because that's where my kids go. And I'll tell you, when I walk by those bathrooms, they actually have a lot of new, nice facilities that are unisex because every bathroom stall is individual and there's a communal sink. And I think that that is a great way to address this concern. I don't understand. I simply do not understand why they think this is a good use of resources. And it's not a good use of our time, so I'm going to move on. So because we're a week early here today, I actually spent my week in Topeka because our state board meeting was this week. And it was a long week of meetings. On Monday, I chaired the policy committee, and then our meeting kicks off on Tuesday for the full board. We did not have a super heavy agenda. We got out at noon on Wednesday, which is always a nice surprise, but we did have a very big vote, and I talked about it here last month, which is cut scores. Last month, I described the process that teachers went through because teachers set our new cut scores for the new assessments. And I was really nervous going in on Tuesday. I did not know if we were going to have the votes or not. And the conversation at the board table was so encouraging. I was so surprised, delighted to hear some of my colleagues talking about how they listened to the previous month's presentations. We've been working on this for so long. They listened, they learned, they came, we had a great conversation, and when it came time to vote, I'm sitting there counting the votes from my seat right before they raised their hands, and I thought, I think we've got an 8-2 vote, because even one member who would normally vote against anything having to do with testing had very good things to say about the cut scores. She ended up voting against them because it still had to do with testing. So we got a 7-3 vote, but the cut scores passed. This is a really big deal because now we can finally start to have better conversations about the levels that our kids are in as they move towards proficiency in reading and math and science. We also learned that they had to throw out one of the science tests because it didn't quite meet the requirements, and so they had to go back to the drawing board on that. But it was a great discussion. And it's really nice to see so many people at the state level working together, bringing in those individual teachers, having the conversations. I'm so proud of so many of our board members. And I don't know why those other two people voted against it other than it's political. And we got emails from very partisan organizations saying, you're going to lower the standards. And we did not lower the standards. We didn't lower them. We have a new test. We had to set new scores. And now we have better metrics with which to look at the distribution of where our kids are and what it's going to mean to really reach them and meet their needs at whatever level they're in. If they're in level 1 or 2, we need to be working really hard to move them up to the next level. We've got a lot of kids in 2, we've got a lot of kids in 3. There are still way too many kids in level 1. We've got to move those kids that are in the top half of level 1 into level 2 because we want our kids reading. We want them to have math skills. So, yes, very excited about that vote. Let's see. I trust the experts. I talk about it a lot all the time. I talked about it with, with this particular item on setting the cut scores. Teachers are the path, and we need to free them up to teach. When I think about, because we had a light board meeting, I kind of had some time to ponder things. And it's like, what can we be doing next? How does this board of 10 people find things that we can agree on and that we can work towards? And we did, in fact, have a conversation about board goals. But I think it's more important that we talk about tactically what we want to do. And I'm really worried about what it's going to take to keep teachers in our classrooms. We're not paying them enough. But there are other things that we can be doing besides paying them. It's really hard at a state level to set some policy that says, well, we're going to pay all teachers, this base salary. That'd be great if somebody wants to pass that law. Cool, but the funding's not there. They keep cutting the funding. And so as we looked at our budgets this month and we had a conversation about board salaries, it's like there's no money to do anything with at the state level either. So when I think about what can we do to help teachers, we've got to support teachers in those first 5 years of their career. That's when we lose them. They come, they teach for 1 or 2 years. They go, man, this is nuts. And they're out the door. And it's because there are so many things that are piled on. They've got a bell schedule that's very specific. And it's like someone's telling them, you're going to do these things in your classroom. They don't have great retirement prospects. Could we have a better retirement plan? We've talked about capers. We've talked about the COLA. You guys know where that went, right? So how can we have better incentives for these teachers and really create a foundation in those first 5 years where they're like, this is awesome, I want to stay. And I think a lot of that is autonomy. If we're going to trust experts, we need to trust those people that went to school to become great teachers. Like, let's let them do their job and teach. And so I want to pivot a little bit and think about how that impacts students, because everything that we do has to be done with the best interests of students in mind. They should always be first. Students first. And then great teachers that can support those students and who have the autonomy to do what they know those students need. So if you'll recall, I've talked about how I came to this work. I was not interested in politics. I was interested in education. My stepmom was a teacher. She and my dad built a website. I got pulled into that universe, and that was how I became a software engineer, was because I was working on that website, and I was a self-taught software developer. But my stepmom was a 4th grade teacher. And I had forgotten and was kind of thinking on the way here about how back in those days, this was the mid-1990s, bulletin boards were all the thing, right? So much energy went into bulletin boards. I love the teacher heads nodding. And so my dad designed this bulletin board. It said, welcome to the real world. And I get goosebumps when I say it because my dad was MacGyver. Like, he was the man who taught me everything. This week, I went down to my laundry room down on the lower level of my house and discovered that there was water all over everything. And I'm like, uh-oh. And I go upstairs and I tell the kid who just took a shower, hey, I think we have a problem with the shower. And so last night, she and I took apart the drain, kind of, okay, let's go to Lowe's and get some things. We actually needed a new tool. We needed a gasket. We got the whole job done in one evening. And I could show you the pictures. She did all the work. I walked her through it, and we started by grabbing the wrong tools. We needed to get that drain out, and we couldn't get it out. So I said, well, let's see what we can do with what we got. Here's the vice grips. Here's the longest pair of pliers that I could find because the big ones were too fat. And so, we tried and we failed. I'm like, cool, let's go buy the right tool. So we went, we got all the things, we got the drain fixed. We can't test it yet because she learned that the plumber's putty has to set for 24 hours, right? That is a project-based learning opportunity. She learned about a whole bunch of different stuff, and that is problem solving, and that is something that I think we need to see a whole lot more of in schools, is giving kids projects, letting them work on all different kinds of things that are associated with and that still tie to standards, but they don't have to do it on a bell schedule. I also asked at the state board meeting this week, we do future agenda items at the end of the meeting. I said, can we talk about recess? We need to talk about recess because we've got kids that are spending all day long on screens. They've got their laptops open. They've got their tablets out. We also talked during this board meeting about when are we going to have a proper conversation about appropriate device usage based on ages and stages. Should the little bitty kids be on tablets? But I wanted to tie that back to recess because if we can start by talking about recess, then we can talk about where we spend our time. And then I get all the things that I just talked about. So that is my dream. I wanted to share part of my dream because that's really, I'm trying to look towards, what can we do in these coming months to keep people from being distracted by things like Title IX and FERPA. Like, let's work on things that we can actually affect. And I think that there are some things that we can get most of our board members to work on together and actually agree on. So I want to end by saying, with those project-based learning opportunities, I've seen some really neat things in school. I think I told you about how Baser Linwood had a class that was the entire afternoon. And one year, they built a new park, and kids got credit for that. And I just think that that is so cool. They were able to tie it to marketing. They counted it as a business class, so they got some electives in there. They met with the city had engineers that they brought out. The kids went out to the site and they looked at how I don't even know the right words, how they assess the site and plan how they're going to build a playground. And then they were able to eventually actually do that work. And so you guys asked previously about AI and where are we going with AI? what we're starting to see, and again, I work in software engineering when I'm fully employed, and what we're seeing in that space is a lot of jobs are starting to be helped out by AI. And we're hearing that more and more of those entry level jobs, not just in software, but across the board, are going away. So if you can't come in as a high school graduate or a college graduate and start a job because your job has been taken by a computer, or at least the number of those jobs have been reduced to just a couple of people, how do you get your foot in the door? And what are we doing to work with business and industry to make sure that students coming out of high school have opportunities for apprenticeships and have opportunities for internships? We talk a lot about apprenticeships. We don't talk as much about internships. How do you get your foot in the door? I live on LinkedIn. Like, if you want a new job, you have to know somebody. So what are we going to do to make sure that those kids have an in and that they have a path? That kid that helped me with the plumbing, 2 years ago, she wanted to be a doctor. And every year it changes just a little bit. And so we've morphed from I want to be a physician to I want to be in a lab. And now it's I think I want to be an engineer, but I don't know what kind of engineer. I'm not sure if it's industrial or electrical or I don't know. And I think that's great because she's having an opportunity to think about all the different things and try the different things. So we've got to make sure that kids have all the exposure that they need, that we're partnering with businesses in the state, and that those businesses are stepping up and saying, yes, we want to help our schools. So those are my dreams this week. Just wanted to share. Thank you. Whoever is next. Senator Pat Petty. I want to say while she's walking up here, a huge thanks to Jim Porter from the State Board of Education, who is serving on this task force. And she can tell you all about what happened this week.
I'm Senator Pat Petty. I'm usually not part of this great group. I represent the 6th District, which is mostly Wyandotte County and a small portion of Johnson County, a good example of redistricting, although I'm very happy to have, hello over there, I'm very happy to have Johnson County as part of my district. I do live in Wyandotte County. I live in the Turner School District. Talking about project-based learning, I was a teacher in the Turner School District for 36 years, and that district has had a home building program for over 20 years. So it's a good example of project-based learning that's been going on for a long time. However, I'm up here to talk a little bit about what's happening with the school funding task force. So we've been meeting since March for a day and a half every month. And I will say that initially the chair, Senator Renee Erickson, had said, I think maybe it was in April, she said, we're going to have a bill to introduce in January of 2026. And she's the chair for this year or this session. And then the vice chair, who's Representative Susan Estes, will take over as the chair in January of 2026. Well, then last month, one of the members asked, hey, we only have days assigned through September. So last month, one of the members said, well, are we going to be meeting any more past September? And those days have to be approved by the LLC. And the chair said, and now the voice changed. The chair said, well, no. Well, I don't think so. And he also asked about a bill. And she said, and we're not going to have a bill. So suddenly it went from we're going to have a bill to we're not going to have a bill. And I will tell you that, and you probably could guess this already, it's all politically driven because the president of the Senate is running for governor. And guess what the president of the Senate doesn't want to have in the legislature this year? He doesn't want to have a school funding bill because it won't go favorably in his direction. There are 15 members on this committee, and 4 of them are non-voting members. It is very much stacked. I will say, yes, the goal is to change school fund. The goal is to look at, as Senator Corson said, our school funding formula will expire. There are some that thinks it needs to be scrapped. There are many that realized, hey, is it really not working? So we've been looking at every month, we have been looking at what other states are doing. We've taken all of the weightings and looked at what other states are doing it. And when you ever hear anyone say, our school finance formula is complicated, I'm just going to tell you that's true in every state, and complicated in different ways. They are weightings for a reason, and they all provide funding in a different way and for different reasons. So a lot, and when someone says to you, oh, this formula has been in place since 1991, yes, the structure was there in 1991. It's like if you have a house, the structure was there, but now your house did have 2 bedrooms. Now it has 4. It did have 1 bathroom. Now it has 3. I mean, that structure has been changed repeatedly over the years to match the needs of our students. So I will encourage you, if you don't go online and ever look at the reflector, I would say do that, because this, and I just actually glanced at it today, the reflector has an article about exactly what happened in our last meeting, which was just on Thursday, concerning State Board member Jim Porter. And just like Jim Porter, I believe that graduation rates are important. I think a high school diploma is a step forward. For some, it's the step that maybe one of the last educational steps they use to get a job. For others, it's that step into higher education or to a certificate in some field. We've had on this committee that the whole idea of graduation rates so underplayed repeatedly, and sadly, members who have desecrated graduation rate. So you can read about that in the reflector, but that's what the conversation between Jim Porter, who actually asked the virtual school people who were introducing, hey, I like what you're doing. How do you get there? And they listed things that they do to get students to graduate. And then he said, and those are the same things that we're doing in our public high schools every day to move students forward to graduate, in a very polite, nice way. And then the chair went after him in a vicious way. And it was very, well, I will just say, it certainly showed the personality of the person, Senator Renee Erickson, who is chairing this task force, and I think it actually plays out kind of where we're going. So as I told you, we meet 2 times a month, and there's 15 people. 2 of them are superintendents. 1 is the State Board of Education. I made some notes so I wouldn't forget. And I told you about the fact that we're not going to have a bill. So we aren't going to have a bill until the 2027 session. And the other thing is that I just had to say this committee is stacked. There were certain categories where people were supposed to fit into, like there was supposed to be an educator on the committee. Oh, that can be interpreted in different ways. So the educator on the committee is Representative Williams, Christy Williams from El Dorado, who is the vice chair of Ways and Means in the House. But she used to be a teacher, so she falls in that category. So it's very interesting, the makeup of the committee. It looked like it was going to be pretty diverse, but actually it's not. There are 2 Democrats on there, myself and Kristen McDonald from the House. We're the 2 Democrats. Turn my notes here. I think that I've really laid out for you what's happening. You can watch those meetings. We will be meeting again in September the first week of September on Wednesday and Thursday. Those are going to be full-day meetings. So they are on YouTube. You can follow that. But also, I suspect there'll probably be articles in the Reflector again. I will just say that when it's like for the last 2 days, we were on special ed. And you've probably heard a lot about school districts are putting in a lot of their general fund money to supplement special ed. Example is Olathe, $34 million this last year to supplement the money that's coming from the state to support, and from local option budget to support special ed. Shawnee Mission, I think it's about $21 million. So every school district across the state is putting in general fund money that could be going for other like learning-based projects, that could be going for other types of learning opportunities for all students. But because they have to provide special ed services, and our number of students that are receiving special ed services across the state is going up, and their costs is also going up as well. So here's the thing. We looked at, okay, like I mentioned to you, we look at other states, what they're doing, and then we have the staff, the research staff, which I have to give kudos to because they've been doing a lot of work. We'll do runs to compare that state with us and how, if we use their type of formula, how it would affect our school districts. So we have runs for all of the school districts in the state of Kansas. And it's yesterday, I thought if a superintendent or a board member or any parent looked at these runs that we see from other states, like Louisiana, and they're all red, and you're looking at a run that says we're going to be spending, or it's going to cost, I'll just use Olathe as an example. It's going to cost, Olathe is going to lose $34 million when they already were putting in $34 million. Why wouldn't superintendents say, is this committee really looking out for the good of students across the state of Kansas? So I understand why we want to look at a variety of things, but when everything is negative and is spending less money, are we really looking for a better product and for a more a product that provides for our students across the state of Kansas, whether they're in high needs districts or whether they're in more economically viable school districts. So that's a little bit of a picture. I have to say I'm on there. I'm glad to be there, but I'm not totally optimistic about our where we're heading in our work to, and maybe I will be surprised. But I will say we're not going to have a bill this year, and so I would just encourage you to keep in touch, to follow along, and just to support. As the biggest thing is that we're also delving into things that really the legislature, it's not our specialty. It's the state board of specialty. They're focused, just as you heard, on schools. We're focused on, as you heard earlier, we're focused on taxes. We're focused on land management. We're focused on water. We have all of these issues, and yet we want to micromanage. And for example, Representative Estes brought up, hey, every school should be having the same grading schedule. Because, hey, a D here might not be the same as a D over here. So that's the reason why more kids are graduating. I don't know about you. I about fell out of my seat over that one. So I'm keep in touch, and thank you for letting me share that little bit.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Petty and I have overlapping boundaries if you look up there, so it's not unusual for me to follow the senator. And I hope you don't mind if I just add 2 cents to your comments, and that Jim Porter has been the chair of the State Board of Education, and he's a former superintendent, and he'll be finishing his 3rd term there next year. Jim Porter is a really intelligent man, down to earth, level, easygoing. And if you're going to come at him and attack him, then I think it says a lot more about you than Jim Porter. And then to the comment that you made that whenever somebody says our school finance formula is complicated, I reject that because it's not complicated. It's complex. When you break it down into little parts and you look at the waivers and why we have the waivers and the time tested, remodeling of it, the updates, the tweaks that have happened since '92, it's really not complicated. It's just complex. It's a lot of moving parts. But if you break it down, even a guy like me could understand it. So I'm Jarrod Ousley. I don't have too much to say this morning. Last time we met, I was grabbing a plane to Canada, and I made it there and I made it back. So that's a good thing. I was a little nervous about that. But in Canada, we discussed a lot of things. Trade was a big piece of it. And actually, Canada is a big trade partner with the Midwest, including Kansas. And when the former prime minister got up there and was talking about the state of the nations today, he was talking about how Canada can no longer rely upon the United States with this administration as one of their key trade partners. And it was really kind of alarming, outside perspective of where the United States is at right now. With one of our closest allies, and so that was frustrating. But then the next day, speaker was the United States ambassador to Canada, and when he got up in the room full of legislators, Midwestern and Canada, the reception was not as warm a welcome as you thought. And he started talking about border security, and I had to get up and leave. I was like, I'm not in a committee room. This is not a debate. I'm not representing House District 24 in this room right now, currently. I'm not getting paid to be here. So I saved my headache there. So overall, Canada was a good trip. I'd be curious to see what would happen if we went back today with what's happened since then. But, that'll be another trip, another day. We've had a Child Welfare Oversight Committee meeting, and we discussed all the prevention measures that our contractors and our Department of Children and Families have been working on, and that's all great news, and I look forward to a lot of it being implemented. I think people are finally realizing that maybe we could do a better job of stopping, the inflow upstream instead of catching them when they're downstream. And there was a lot of positivity come out of that meeting. The Johnson County Commission on Aging, I'm the legislative liaison on that. We just met Wednesday when Senator Corson was talking about, property tax relief and folks aging in place. We were going over our legislative platform in the commission, and, affordable, accessible housing was the number one piece. And I don't know how you address that without addressing property tax. So spot on there. And I think that's about it. I'll have a couple other committees before we meet again. Kansas Securities is going to meet. The Joint Building Construction Committee is going to meet. We're looking at 5-year capital outlay projects. So I'll have a little bit more of an update next month. But for now, I can be brief and hand it over to one of my colleagues, Representative Xu.
Hello, everybody. Representative Xu, House District 25. I'm nestled neatly in the corner over there in that graph, so redistricting was fun. They couldn't really mess with me that much. I went to Canada with Jarrod, and I think I'm going to make some people mad, but it was amazing. It was 70 degrees the whole time that we were there with almost no humidity. We were all big fans of Saskatoon, which we knew nothing about. It's just like a mid-sized city, 300,000 people with a river flowing through the middle of downtown and just like beautiful bridges crossing that river, and you can kind of go back and forth. Amazing city. Highly recommend it. Really no new updates for me either. The only thing was that I was on the joint committee for TEFIs. Just as a quick reminder, a couple of years ago, maybe 2021 or 2022, the legislature passed a bill that allowed for what we call technology-enabled fiduciary financial institutions. Basically what it was a framework to allow for this one company, essentially Beneficient, to come into the state and create a company that houses alternative assets. These are real, legit financial instruments that are very hard to liquidate. So there are things like, it could be real estate, it could be like wine collection sometimes. And so Beneficient as a TEFI would be able to house this alternative asset and then provide that liquidity to clients. And so we would be kind of the first in the country to do it. And it was beneficial to the state. So there were a series of fees that Beneficient would levy, and then the state would get it. And I will say, over the last couple of years, they have made every single required payment out of them. It's been a good thing for the state. And when I was analyzing the bill as the ranking on that committee, there's really no downside to the state. However, there is downside to the company itself. So Beneficient, if you Google it, there has just been a litany of bad stories. Their stock price as of a couple weeks ago, at least, was like 36 cents. And so basically now we're essentially partnering with what is a penny stock. Again, they're still making their payments. It's not, if they go under, there's nothing that the state is at risk for. But most recently, the story is that their CEO has resigned as well. So there have just been like the series of stories and stories and stories about Beneficient. So I've been pushing for a couple years to at least dissolve the TEFI, or at least give the banking commissioner the ability to dissolve a TEFI if the numbers truly become concerning. So basically what we're at is we had the hearing. The chair of the committee decided to give it a couple of months, and then we'll meet again in October, where I will try to make the motion. There are a couple of members on that committee who are from Heston, and that's where kind of this TEFI is or originated from, and that's where they have promised a grocery store, kind of with the funds and the fees, but that has not come to fruition yet either. But those people are very in bed with Beneficient as a company, and so we'll see how that goes. But we'll try to do more. Again, the state is not at financial risk of anything. It's just there's just been enough smoke about this particular company that I think it's time to look at it a little bit deeper. But other than that, again, like I said last month, we're kind of in the dregs of legislative updates right now. Just there's things going on here and there, but nothing super substantive. So with that, I'll turn it over to our last legislator, Representative Stogsdill. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. I'm Representative Jerry Stogsdill. I represent the 21st District, which takes in most of Prairie Village and a little part of Overland Park. And I have to apologize. I just got my internet service back, and I'm really excited to see what happened in Alaska yesterday. Apparently, there's going to be world peace, and tariffs are going to be completely unnecessary, and never mind. Anyway, well, I only bring that up in the fact that the three committees that I serve on, water, education, and tax, I've never seen the federal government so imposing on all of those issues. And the only certain thing that's coming out of Washington, D.C. right now is uncertainty. And that is just almost on a daily basis. It's really hard to plan for water policy, for tax policy, for education policy, when you don't know what the heck is going to come out of Washington, D.C. that's going to impact all of those issues in the state of Kansas. So in the Water Committee, I know we're still waiting to see what Washington's going to do with our whalehead collector back there, who will be he wants to get rid of fluoride, of course, in our water systems, which is absolutely insane. We had that discussion in Water Committee last year, and the bipartisan recommendation on that is that we keep fluoride in our water system. So we're going to have to wait and see what RFK Jr. is going to come up with over the next 5 months before we go back in January. Tax Committee, again, we absolutely need to focus on property taxes. And again, who knows what they're going to come up with as far as tax policy in Washington, D.C., what grants we're going to lose in Kansas, what kind of educational funding we're going to lose in Kansas. And there again, on the Education Committee that I'm on, it's very hard to plan for next year when we can't even know what's going on next Thursday. So we're waiting on that. And again, I'd like to have some report there or some idea of what we're going to be looking at in January. But to be quite frank, I don't have a clue right at the moment. So we'll keep you informed as things go on and everything. And I'll be quick because I know we want to get to questions. But how many people in here have heard of Mary Elizabeth Lease? Raise your hand. Me either until this week. I want to bring this up because I went to, I got my commission. I went to Officers Candidate School in Newport, Rhode Island. And I've always had a kind of a fascination with the Gilded Age. If you've ever been to Newport to see the mansions, well, the summer cottages of 125 rooms, that sort of thing. And they had a tremendous documentary on PBS, and it's on YouTube now this week about the Gilded Age. And I'm telling you, the parallels between the Gilded Age and what we're going through now is shocking. We call them titans of industry here. They called them robber barons. I much prefer the robber barons thing because we're getting robbed blind by these people. And anyway, in this 2-hour documentary, which I highly recommend you watch, there's a whole segment on Kansas and about Kansas farms and so on, and how they were basically controlled by the big banks in New York, Chicago, the commodities markets back there. Kansas farmers they were making tremendous amounts of grain and so on, but they were practically bankrupt because of the banks in New York that were giving them loans, which could demand interest rates of up to 50% a year. And then they were dependent upon the railroads to get their grains and stuff to market, which were also controlled by the robber barons back in that age. And one woman in Kansas, her name is Mary Elizabeth Lease. Look her up. She started the People's Party in Kansas back in the 1880s, and they laughed at her. Women couldn't vote back then. They couldn't hold office, couldn't hold state office in Kansas, and she was a farmer. Her husband was a druggist that lost all of they lost their drugstore and so on because of the panic in the 1880s, financial panic. And she was a teacher. And when they lost all that, they moved to Wichita, and she went to law school and became a lawyer, which was incredible for those days. And she got so ticked off at what was going on in Washington, D.C., and what was going on with these robber barons and so on, that she started the People's Party in Kansas. And everybody laughed at her. Republicans were in charge of the legislature back then in Topeka. Surprise, surprise. And anyway, she started this, and they put together a full slate of candidates for the Kansas House of Representatives that year. And by her going through and organizing labor unions and which were just starting, and farmers and so on, the Democrats that year won 6 seats, I believe it was, in the Kansas House. The Republicans won, I think it was 26, and the People's Party won 91. 91 seats. And that tells me that we cannot give up. We have hope. We can do this if we work together. If a woman in the 1880s can put together something like that completely changed the legislature in Kansas, we have a good shot at doing that next year. And we have to really focus on that. But I watch that documentary. It's really something. And she was really something. So I want to give us plenty of time for questions and so on. So I'll quit there and look forward to your questions. Thank you.
All right. Maxwell's got the mic, and just raise your hand if you have a question.
Hello. Oh. Thank you, Kyla. Um, Leslie from 25th District, represented ably by Rui and obviously Senator Corson, and very ably by Melanie Haas. And I don't have a question. I have a thank you to all of you, but Melanie especially today, because you did something that none of us is very good at, which is working hard to keep imagining, to keep engineering, to keep imagineering, as I try and say at doors when I'm talking to friends and neighbors. We have to work hard. It's true. And Jerry reached back into history to help give us a great leading lamp light to work by. But we have our own imaginations about what it is we want to work for and toward. And Kansas isn't all damn broken, thank you very much. But we have to work extra too hard most of the time. And so I really appreciate your comments, Patty, because it gives us a good, clear idea of exactly what we're up against yet and still. And so whether we're organizing like Ms. Lease or something else, I really appreciate, Melanie, your hard work and the great expression and a vote of 7-3. Who would have thunk it? So thank you.
This is to all of you. With the cuts that came from Doge, we've lost a lot of money to the state of Kansas from a federal standpoint. That from water, Jerry, to, small rural communities needed those funds. Is there any way we're even going to be able to make any of that up, or are we just sunk?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think anybody knows at this point. I had lunch with the lobbyist for the Shawnee Mission School District last week, and he was talking about the same thing. It's so hard to figure out what's going on because they got notification they were going to lose millions of dollars in federal funding. And then like 3 days later, they got another notification said, nah, we're going to rescind on that. Well, you need some kind of certainty in legislative process to be effective in that sort of thing. And when you're dealing with total uncertainty, it's very hard to do any planning. And I wish I could say that we know what we're going to be working with, but we don't. Well, the example was Health and Human Services back there cut $500 million or so for research and vaccines and so on. And those projects were already underway, and they cut them. So we don't know. And I've heard that there's going to be cuts at Kansas State, and in relationship to the agricultural bioterrorism center up there. I don't like the sound of agricultural bioterrorism and funding cuts all in the same sentence. That doesn't sound like a very good idea to me. But no, I don't think that. I think there's going to be a lot of programs out there that are already underway that if things keep going the way they are in Washington, you'll see them stopped right in the middle.
We had the ESSER dollars on the education side had been suddenly truncated. We were in the middle of contracts. We were paying to train teachers, and we were told, oh, the money's gone. Those who are allowed, if we can be noisy enough, and unfortunately the noise that they hear is usually a lawsuit, but when you make a bunch of noise, they seem to pay attention. And so those ESSER dollars eventually came back to Kansas. We were able to get everything that we were promised. But first, the Kansas Attorney General refused to join the lawsuit. And so we had to just wait. And a lot of people made a lot of noise to make that happen. Just this week, we saw federal dollars come back, actually physically like deposited, that we had been waiting for. So I think, honestly, I think it's a matter of you have to make a lot of noise about the things that you care about. And unfortunately, that usually means filing a lawsuit. But anything that we can do as a grassroots effort to try to get our voices heard, it certainly doesn't hurt.
Over here. Hi, Ethan. This is for all of you, and it's sort of a follow-on to Richard's question and Melanie, your comment. Is there a clearinghouse? I mean, KLRD, has somebody asked KLRD to put together something that says this is how Kansas has been affected by Doge? All the programs, all the money. Is there someplace in one place that we can get the information? You can tell that we're all kind of flummoxed by it right now because it's all being done individually, some sort of under the, under the radar. I mean, is KLRD the right place to go to ask for?
Yeah, so KLRD is the Kansas Legislative Research arm. I have not seen anything. I mean, I know Kansas Action for Children has a really good piece out. It's probably not comprehensive, but it kind of covers the issues that they're concerned about. I haven't seen an overall picture, but I will just add the point I want to make is it's not just the Doge cuts. There's a lot in the federal bill that was passed that is also Medicaid, other things that are going to be significant cuts.
Yeah, that was just the point that I was going to make, is that it's kind of hard to track the Doge cuts specifically because it is executive branch action. And like Jerry was saying, it's kind of, they might be doing it, they might not be doing it. We're not really sure if and when. Whereas there is tracking that I've seen of exactly specifically for Kansas on the One Big Beautiful Bill, because that is in statute and because that does have like explicit timelines. And so I think maybe ACLU had something like that for the Big Beautiful Bill. I can try to search through my email inbox, but that one's a little bit easier because, again, it was legislative. There are explicit timelines, whereas for Doge, it was just kind of, a small department running through the executive branch.
Yeah, just real quickly too. I had a meeting with the 8 deans of education about 3 or 4 weeks ago. To talk about what they're looking at as far as the departments of the colleges of education in Kansas. We've got to find ways to fill those 1,900 teaching vacancies we had last year, and I've asked them to if they get any cuts at any programs that are denied money for programs that they are asking for, to let me know immediately, and I will try to get that information out to you. But they're dealing with the same thing. They don't know. And as like I said, at K-State, they lost millions of dollars, and then they came back a week or so later and said, well, we're going to send that back to you. So it's real hard to get hard information about that when things are so uncertain.
But then to add more to the moving target of the Doge cuts, do you take into consideration all the people that worked for the federal government that took the early buyout? Do you take into consideration, the others that are still there but hanging on by a thread? So, I mean, there's really a ton of moving parts.
I have about 20 questions I'd like to ask, but I'm going to cut it down a little bit. Thank you very much to all of you. I've never seen a group of representatives that are so straightforward and honest. So thank you. I wanted to ask about the property tax issue. That's obviously risen up since so many of us are arguing and yelling and complaining about it. I think probably because it's a bill that comes once a year, and as opposed to sales tax and income tax, that's every now and then. I grew up here in Kansas, got married, and started paying attention to my budget. And so, being a little anal, I took one year and I took the property tax and the sales tax and the income tax and put them all together and then put that to my income that was coming in. And then we moved to Texas, to Houston. And then I did the same thing, property tax, sales tax, income tax. And then we left there after 4 years and I went to North Carolina and I did the same math there. And the percentage was exactly the same in all 3 states. You know, Texas, I thought, well, now they don't do income tax. So, you know, boy, this is really good. Well, they made up for it with, you know, the other 2. So I'm just, I guess the essence of the question is if we wind up cutting property taxes down, then where are we going to recover the income that's lost from that? What other tax?
There have been a couple of proposals on that one. There was one last year called the Astra Fund. Speaking of which, Ethan and I both had kids start kindergarten this week, and so if we seem particularly weepy, that is the reason why. But the Astra Fund essentially would take kind of state general fund dollars and then kind of remit it back to the counties to kind of buy down property taxes a little bit, and it would have to be explicitly to do that. And so, you know, that is kind of more of a spreading out of it. There have been other proposals too, and then this is something that I've been thinking about a lot. So I'm a younger homeowner, which means that my property taxes are just going through escrow, right? So I basically don't think about it. It's just kind of in this payment that I make every month. And I was asking somebody who'd been there a while, I was like, why can't we do that for people who have already paid off their houses? And so they can kind of spread out their payments rather than just having the one-time bill. Because even if they are rising 10%, 15% every year, at least it's still spread out 12 times or 6 times or however you want to do it. And I believe state statute does prevent that from being able to happen. So as we continue to have these property tax discussions, that's at least a small idea that I think it doesn't lower your payments, but at least lets you spread them out potentially. So I think that would be helpful to people as well.
I would just add to that you know, your question about where do we make that up from when we start cutting property taxes? One of my frustrations with my 5 years I've been in the legislature is that we've been very income tax cut focused, and we've not only been income tax focused, but we've been really income tax, not we, because not all of us agreed with that, but the legislature has been very income tax focused on a lot of tax cuts that went to already very high earners, very well-off people. So those folks got a tax cut. And I think that some of that difference could have been better used to make sure that we were really addressing concerns with property taxes. So we've sort of substituted property tax relief for folks who really need it with income tax cuts for the wealthiest Kansans. And I don't think that's a good trade. So.
Jerry, I was just wondering, the 1,900 comes out of what? The public schools or? Okay.
I'd like to stay focused on the property tax question for a moment. Can you address the allocation between residential, commercial, agricultural, that for property taxes? Talk about the source of law for that allocation, and then tell us whether any of you are going to be fighting to alter that allocation.
It's a great question, Paula. I had this better in my head a couple of months ago when we were in session, but basically the different properties, residential, agricultural, commercial, are assessed at different rates, which coincidentally is the reason why I personally oppose just kind of a flat mill cut, which I think I ended up voting for because you got to vote for property tax cuts. But if you just do like a 1 mill cut on everything, that actually ends up being regressive because the corporations and the agricultural communities actually get the biggest cuts because they're assessed at much higher rates. versus residential. So that's all the context that I have to your question. You as a former locally elected official might have a better answer onto the actual allocation, but I know that they just are assessed at much higher rates than residential.
Yeah. Again, I think it's really hard to plan what to do in that area. I know, and as far as agriculture goes, I was speaking to one of the representatives on the water committee, Republican from Western Kansas. He raises sorghum and cattle, and I asked him at the end of the session. I said, "What are you going to be doing out there?" And he said, "Well, we've always had a very robust sorghum market, but like 90% of our market was China." And he said, "I don't even know whether we're going to plant sorghum this year because the market is basically gone, and they've gone to Brazil and Canada, and they're not coming back." So it's hard to look at where we're going to be having as far, or what kind of impact the national policies are going to have on Kansas agriculture, that sort of thing. So again, it's almost impossible to answer that question right at the moment.
Do one more and then wrap up. All right. That's a good place to stop. Hey, thanks so much for being here. We really appreciate it. Reminder, we'll be back on our regular 4th Saturday schedule in September. We're meeting today because they do the renovations annually at the end of August every year at Sylvester Powell. But we'll be back on a regular 4th Saturday schedule. And if you didn't sign in when you got here, if you'll sign in, we'll be able to send you email reminders about exactly when that is. So thank you again. Have a great rest of your weekend.